From being a high-octane thrill fest for car enthusiasts since 2001, to overstaying its welcome more than 2 decades later, here's all about the rise and fall of the Fast and Furious franchise. So buckle up, we're going back in time. The year was 2001. On a late June weekend, one of the new releases was The Fast and the Furious, a summer car racing film starring Paul Walker, who was probably best known to audiences at the time as a menacing rich jerk face in the thriller The Skulls. It also starred Vin Diesel, who was recently seen in the thriller Boiler Room as a supporting actor. The trailer claimed that when the sun goes down, another world comes to life, revealing a world of car racing and sensuality. And what do you know? People were shocked. Whether you like it or not, you've most likely seen at least one of the Fast and Furious films at some point in your life. Everyone has heard of the giant blockbusters that seem to debut every year and make $1 billion before disappearing. The Fast franchise wasn't one to do that, though. The franchise, which is primarily directed by Justin Lin, has managed to survive despite widespread criticism with each iteration. In fact, the cast and crew of the franchise celebrated 20 whole years in 2021. After a year and a half of lockdowns and the pandemic, the movie that drew people back into theaters was F9, which grossed a record $726.2 million. The sustained success of these films demonstrates that the popcorn movie is still alive and well. This is probably because there's a method to the madness. For example, in the first film, the wildest thing that happens is jumping over some train tracks. By the 5th film, the characters are dragging a massive safe through the streets of New York, destroying everything in sight. 2 of the characters in the 9th film strap a rocket to their car and soar into space. It's safe to assume that each film becomes increasingly ludicrous. And well, some people really like that. The franchise is also great at clinging to its roots, which is part of its charm. Every film has at least one street race to remind viewers that they are watching the same franchise. Plus, the climax of each film revolves around cars. It turns out, Vin Diesel is somewhat responsible for most of this, considering he's been in the producer's chair for the film since the 4th feature. Whatever the situation, you can be sure he'll find a way to incorporate his Dodge Charger into it. If you're comfortable with not taking everything too seriously and just enjoying the ride, pun intended, you'll be hard-pressed not to find moments throughout these films to laugh, cheer, and be absolutely bewildered. Plus, fan or not, everyone shed a tear when it was time to say goodbye to Paul Walker's Brian, and "See You Again" plays through the background. There wasn't a single dry eye in the house. These movies remained crowd pleasers, especially among car lovers who take pride in their cool cars. And I love to watch brawls between buff dudes and, of course, lowbrow humor. The franchise never pretended to be anything else. There's no obligation, and you don't need to know what happened in the previous films to appreciate them. Diesel believes the Fast and Furious brand has the power to reach a new generation, as well as those who fell in love with the first flicks. When it comes to spectacle, F9 does not disappoint, pushing the boundaries with elaborate action scenes and literally out-of-this-world feats as the squad seeks to save the globe. In fact, franchises are often accused of repeating themselves, but successful ones don't do that. Not only has the F&F cast changed, but the concepts have shifted, particularly in terms of these characters' power dynamics. Which brings me to the question, what's left of the 2001 blockbuster, The Fast and the Furious? Diesel and Rodriguez? Racing cars? Don't get me wrong. The F&F films are still enjoyable, and the folks who work on the action sequences are really talented. But in scaling up, and up, it led to these films continuing for the sake of continuity. When you look closely, it's easy to see that they're not as popular as they once were. The movies aren't what they used to be, and the series epitomizes the phrase, "too much of a good thing." The idea of fast cars, illegal street races, and realistic displays of car maintenance are charming, sure. But the magic has worn off with time. Simply put, the films were at their peak during the time of The Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. And by Fast X, we've all gotten a little tired. The films were based on family bonds and fast cars, with street racing serving as the series' backbone. They were over the top, but they had a lot of heart and cool factor in them. As time passed, the emphasis changed from the underground racing scene toward murder-vengeance stories, government operations, and cyber-terrorism. That's when the films began to lose their charm. Some plot lines become repetitive, and even the big-budget action sequences couldn't compensate for a lack of substance. Speaking of having too many movies, there are now too many characters to keep up with. The original cast included fan favorites such as Dominic and Mia Toretto, Lenny Ortiz, and Tej Parker. Each new movie started to introduce new characters, all of which added hardly any value to the series. While this isn't always a bad thing, the films lose emotional weight when the audience is forced to divide their attention among the entire cast. This is especially true with a cast full of A-listers, such as Vin Diesel, Dwayne Johnson, and Jason Statham, as well as John Cena and Charlize Theron. It's difficult for any character to stand apart. Another reason why the franchise had a downfall was the apparent deaths and resurrections of some characters. Dom's girlfriend Letty is said to have died in the fourth film, but she reappears in Fast 5 after surviving a murder attempt. Han Lu, a team member, is allegedly killed in an accident in Tokyo Drift, but later appears in Fast and Furious and Fast 5. After learning that these two films were prequels, we see Han killed for the second time in Fast and Furious 6, only to reappear in Fast and Furious 9. Seriously, who's writing all this stuff? When characters supposedly die and are resurrected at will, their deaths and sacrifices lose a lot of value. What's more, when the films initially came out, they promised high-octane thrills and over-the-top action that pushed the boundaries while remaining entertaining to watch. The majority of the action consisted of street races and the occasional fistfight, giving us the underground race image fans had come to expect. Sure, the Fast and Furious franchise has always pushed the boundaries of suspension of disbelief, but the thrills then became out of control. Characters in movies were seen jumping over automobiles at highway speeds, driving tanks on the open road, leading submarines through ice, and dealing with nuclear weapons. What began as a diverse bunch of car enthusiasts living for the road grew into something else that made people lose interest. The ideas don't match well, and the films have mostly abandoned their roots. Plus, what's with all the spin-offs? They definitely gave fans the ick. Sure, spin-offs can be fantastic when done well. They're ideal for allowing different characters to share their stories and allowing fans to spend more time in their favorite fictional realms. Unfortunately, the Fast franchise went ahead and released far too many for fans to keep up with. Case in point, the animated series Fast and Furious Spy Racers, which introduces a band of children recruited by the government to take down huge criminal organizations. Was that really necessary, guys? The Fast creators understandably wanted to go all out and reach new audiences, but the spin-offs suffered from the same problem as the core film series: a lack of substance. There are only so many stories to tell about the underground race scene. To justify massive action scenes and larger-than-life cars, the movies made a hard left towards espionage and criminal empires. But it wasn't enough to compensate for mediocre narratives and recycled cliches. So with Fast X, we'll finally, hopefully gracefully, say goodbye. That's all about the rise and fall of the F&F franchise.